"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to clear the area. This is a restricted zone." The voice was young, sharp, and saturated with the self-importance of a freshly issued uniform. Arthur Jenkins didn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on the colossal cargo ship, the MV Starlight, held silhouetted against the gray afternoon sky a half-mile out in the bay. He was a man well into his 70s, dressed in worn-out khakis and a faded polo shirt, a floppy fishing hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. He looked less like a threat and more like a grandfather who had wandered away from a tour group. "We have a highly sensitive situation ongoing," the young Coast Guard officer Miller continued, stepping closer. His partner hung back, arms crossed, radiating board authority. "We have drones in the air, thermal imaging, and a tactical team on standby. The last thing we need is a civilian getting in the way." Arthur lowered his binoculars, the simple, inexpensive pair looking like a child's toy in his large, wrinkled hands. He turned his head slowly, his eyes the color of a faded sea chart meeting Miller's. They held a placid depth that was unnerving. "What's their rhythm?" Arthur asked, his voice a low, gravelly hum. Miller blinked. "Their what?" "The men on the ship. What's their rhythm? Who walks the portside catwalk at the top of the hour? Who checks the stern? Is the leader visible, or is he delegating the patrols?" A smirk touched Miller's lips. "Sir, with all due respect, we have that handled. It's all data points on a screen in the command tent. We don't need bird watching." He gestured dismissively at the binoculars. Arthur didn't take the bait. He simply turned back to the ship. He pulled a small, spiral-bound notebook and a pencil from his pocket and made a few marks on a fresh page. The gesture, so simple and analog, seemed to infuriate the young officer. This entire dock was a high-tech, high-stakes theater of operations. Federal agents, shipping company executives, and tactical officers moved with brisk, anxious energy. News vans were held back a quarter-mile away, their long lenses like a row of accusing fingers. And here was this old man, doodling. The situation was dire. 12 hours ago, a team of modern-day pirates armed with automatic weapons and a chilling degree of professionalism had boarded and seized the MV Starlight and its crew of 22. Their demands were simple and astronomical, $50 million, untraceable. Their deadline was sunrise. Miller decided he had wasted enough time. "Okay, that's it. I need to see some identification, and then you need to leave. Now," Arthur continued to sketch, his hand steady. It wasn't an artistic rendering but a series of lines and arrows, a crude map of movement and time. He was ignoring the officer not out of defiance, but out of a focus so complete that Miller's presence was merely a buzzing insect at the edge of his consciousness. This pushed Miller over the edge. He was a product of an academy that taught him procedure, dominance, and the clear-cut lines of authority. This old man was blurring all of them. "Did you hear me?" Miller's voice rose, attracting the attention of a few nearby officials. He stepped forward and put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "ID. Now, or I'm placing you under escort." Arthur stopped writing. He slowly, deliberately placed the notebook back in his pocket and reached for the worn leather wallet in his hip pocket. The crowd of onlookers was growing. A severe-looking woman in a tailored business suit, the shipping line's chief of security, Miss Vance, strode over. "What's the problem here, officer?" she asked, her eyes flicking over Arthur with undisguised contempt. "This man refuses to clear the area. He's interfering with a federal operation," Miller said, puffing up slightly under her authoritative gaze. Vance looked at Arthur's simple attire, his age, and the calm, almost detached look on his face. "Is he senile? Get him out of here. He's a liability. We have the best tactical minds in the country working on this. We don't need Grandpa's 2 cents. Arthur finally produced his wallet and handed it to Miller. It was old, the leather softened and cracked with age. Miller flipped it open, expecting to see a driver's license and a few faded family photos. He saw the license confirming the name Arthur Jenkins, age 78. But tucked behind it was another card. It was a simple laminated piece of cardstock, yellowed with time. It had no photo, just a typed name and a single stark emblem, a stylized anchor intertwined with a key. Miller stared at it, confused. It looked like nothing he had ever seen. "What is this? Some kind of novelty ID," he sneered, holding it up for Vance to see. Vance glanced at it and scoffed. "Probably from some yacht club. Officer, I'm ordering you to remove this man. He is a security risk. If he resists, arrest him." Miller, emboldened, snatched the small notebook from Arthur's shirt pocket. "And what is this? Your secret plan?" He flipped it open, revealing pages of simple diagrams, notes on timing, and what looked like weather observations. "This is ridiculous." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. He tossed the notebook onto the dirty pier at Arthur's feet. "Go home, old man. Let the professionals handle this. As Miller's hand closed around the notebook, the world for Arthur flickered for just a second. The scent of salt and diesel from the pier was replaced by the smell of stale air and fear in a concrete bunker. He was 30 years younger. The notebook in his hand was identical, but the page showed the layout of a captured embassy in a war-torn capital. Tense, heavily armed special forces operators surrounded him, their faces grim. The team leader, a colonel with sweat beading on his brow, looked at the drawing with skepticism. "You really think you can talk them down with a drawing, Art?" Arthur's younger voice was just as calm, just as steady. "It's not for them. It's for me. I'm not drawing the building. I'm drawing the cage they've built for themselves. Every man builds his own cage. You just have to find the key." The flash was gone as quickly as it came. The notebook lay in the grime of the dock. The laughter of the young officer echoed in the salty air. Arthur's face remained a mask of placid calm, but a deep, profound sadness flickered in his eyes. The world had changed, but the arrogance of men with guns had not. The confrontation had drawn a larger audience. Dock workers, other Coast Guard personnel, and even a few junior executives from the shipping line were watching the quiet, sad humiliation of the old man. Among them was Captain Eva Rostova, a seasoned Coast Guard commander with 2 decades of service. She was observing from the edge of the official command tent, her face a study in frustration. The negotiations were going nowhere. The pirates were disciplined, their leader cold and unyielding. The tactical team was getting antsy, and the executives were talking about acceptable losses. Rostova's eyes were drawn to the small drama unfolding by the pier. She saw Miller's aggression, Vance's dismissiveness, and the old man's unnerving stillness. She had seen that kind of stillness before, in bomb disposal experts, in surgeons, in pilots flying through storms. It wasn't weakness. It was a kind of focus that filtered out all the noise. Her training, her experience, her gut, everything screamed that Miller was making a terrible mistake. Just then a panicked aide ran out of the command tent. "They've moved up the deadline. 1 hour. They just sent a photo of the ship's captain. They're serious." Panic rippled through the officials. Vance's face went pale. Miller looked momentarily lost, but Rostova's attention was fixed on the old man. While everyone else looked at the tent, at each other, he was the only one still looking at the ship. He bent down slowly, with the creak of old bones, and picked up his notebook, wiping the grime off with his thumb. Rostova made a decision. She walked briskly away from the tent, past the frantic huddles of officials, and straight toward the pier. She ignored Miller and Vance, her eyes locked on Arthur. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice respectful and clear. Miller turned, startled. "Captain, I have this under control." Rostova held up a hand, silencing him without looking at him. She addressed Arthur directly. "You've been watching them for hours. What do you see that our drones don't?" Arthur looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the genuine curiosity, the lack of ego. He pointed a single steady finger toward the ship. "Their leader. He's not in the bridge. The bridge is too obvious, too vulnerable. They're running command and control from the engineering deck, aft section. They're using the ship's internal comms, piggybacking on the system. And their patrols, they're not random. They're walking the same route every 32 minutes. But on the last pass, the port side guard looks down at the water for precisely 10 seconds. Every time, he's not watching for you. He's looking for his own escape." Rostova stared, stunned into silence. He had just laid out a more coherent intelligence picture in 30 seconds than her entire team had assembled in 12 hours. The detail about the engineering deck, the guards tell it was brilliant. It was impossible. How could you know that?" she stammered. Arthur tapped his temple. "You watch long enough, you don't see men, you see patterns. They're telling you their whole story. You just have to be quiet enough to listen." Rostova felt a jolt, a flash of memory from a long-forgotten lecture at the academy about a legendary, almost mythical hostage negotiator from the Cold War. A man they called the Ghost because he would appear, solve an impossible crisis and vanish. She pulled out her secure satellite phone. She didn't call her immediate superior. She bypassed the entire chain of command. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the direct line to the aid of Admiral Hayes, the 4-star chief of naval operations himself. "This is Captain Rostova at Port Angeles," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Sir, you need to tell the Admiral something. There's a man here, a civilian. His name is Arthur Jenkins." She paused, taking a breath. "And I think he's the key." Deep within the Pentagon, in a secure, windowless room known as the Tank, Admiral Marcus Hayes stared at a wall of screens displaying the crisis at Port Angeles. He was a man carved from granite, his face a permanent mask of command. He was listening to the frantic reports, his jaw tight. The tactical option was looking more and more likely, and more grim. His aide, a young lieutenant, scurried to his side and placed a tablet in front of him with a message typed in large, bold letters. Admiral Hayes read the message. His expression of stern focus dissolved, replaced by something else entirely, utter, stupefied shock. The formidable posture sagged for a fraction of a second. The other officers in the room noticed the change immediately. The Admiral, a man who faced down congressional committees and hostile fleets without flinching, looked like he had seen a ghost. "What is it, Admiral?" his chief of staff asked. Hayes looked up from the tablet, his eyes wide. "Get me Captain Rotova on a secure channel, now." He stood up, running a hand over his short gray hair. "Get me a live feed of the pier, full magnification." The lieutenant scrambled to comply. "Sir, who is Arthur Jenkins?" Admiral Hayes turned to the young officer, his voice a low, reverent whisper that silenced the entire room. "Arthur Jenkins is the man they called when admirals like me ran out of ideas. He's the reason the term de-escalation exists in our modern tactical lexicon. During the Cold War, when a submarine crew mutinied with nuclear launch keys in the Barents Sea, and we were 30 minutes from starting World War III, who do you think they sent down in a diving bell with nothing but a thermos of coffee and a pack of cigarettes?" The Admiral pointed a trembling finger at the screen, where the image of the old man on the pier was now centered. "He wrote the book on psychological negotiation. Not one of the books. The book. The one we classify above top secret. Find him. Patch him through to me. And someone tell those idiots on the dock that they are standing in the presence of a living legend." Back at the pier, Miller and Vance were oblivious to the storm about to break over their heads. All they saw was Captain Rostova speaking urgently into a satellite phone while looking at the old man. Their patience had evaporated. "That's it," Vance snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The deadline is in less than an hour. We're done playing games." She nodded at Miller. "Officer, do your duty. This man is a menace." Miller, eager to reassert his authority in front of a superior officer, stepped forward and pulled out a pair of zip-tie cuffs. "Arthur Jenkins, you are interfering with a counter-terrorism operation. I am placing you under arrest." He reached for Arthur's arm, his face set in a grim mask of satisfaction. "We'll have you evaluated. Maybe a nice quiet room is what you need." This was his final, irrevocable step over the line. He was about to lay hands on the one man who could save the 22 souls aboard the MV Starlight. The crowd of onlookers gasped. Rostova, still on the phone, yelled, "Miller, no. Stand down." But it was too late. Miller's fingers were just about to close around Arthur's wrist when a sound cut through the air, a sound that overrode everything. The piercing shriek of multiple sirens, growing impossibly loud, impossibly fast. It wasn't the local police. This was a different sound. Deeper, more urgent. 2 black, unmarked SUVs and a heavy armored command vehicle came screaming down the access road, lights flashing, scattering officials like pigeons. They didn't slow for the command tent. They didn't stop for the security cordon. They roared right onto the pier and screeched to a halt a few feet from Miller, Vance, and Arthur, their tires churning up dust and grit. Simultaneously, the rhythmic thwump, thwump, thwump of a helicopter grew from a distant noise to a deafening roar directly overhead, its downdraft whipping at flags and jackets. Doors flew open on the SUVs. A team of 6 men in crisp Navy uniforms and tactical gear disembarked with practiced lethal efficiency. They moved as one, their faces hard and emotionless. They were led by a man with the silver eagles of a captain on his collar. He was tall, imposing, and his eyes scanned the scene with an expression of cold fury. The pier fell silent. The unfolding drama of the hostage crisis was momentarily forgotten, replaced by this new, shocking spectacle. Miller froze, his hand hovering in the air, the zip-tie cuffs looking like a cheap toy. Vance's jaw hung open, her corporate authority evaporating in the face of this overwhelming military presence. The Navy captain ignored Miller, Vance, and everyone else. His boots crunched on the pavement as he marched directly, unerringly, to the old man in the fishing hat. He stopped 2 feet in front of Arthur, his body ramrod straight. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Mr. Jenkins," the captain's voice boomed across the silent pier. "Admiral Hayes sends his profound apologies for the delay and for your reception here. The command center and every asset at our disposal are now yours." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Phones which had been tentatively recording were now held high, capturing every second. Miller slowly lowered his hand, a look of dawning, sickening horror spreading across his face. He looked from the saluting 4-striper captain to the quiet old man, and the universe as he understood it began to crumble. The Navy captain held his salute, waiting for Arthur's acknowledgement. When Arthur gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, the captain dropped his hand and turned to face the stunned assembly of officials. His eyes, cold as the North Atlantic, landed on Miller and Vance. "For the education of those present," the captain began, his voice laced with ice, "this is Mr. Arthur Jenkins. In 1987, he walked, unarmed, into the besieged American embassy in Beirut and negotiated the release of all 53 hostages after a military assault had failed. In 1994, he was the sole civilian negotiator aboard the Russian submarine K-42, convincing a mutinous crew to stand down and averting a nuclear incident in the Black Sea. In 2002, he coordinated the peaceful resolution of the oil platform seizure in the Gulf of Guinea, an operation so delicate that its details remain classified to this day. He has personally and quietly saved more American and Allied lives than any single person in this harbor. He is not a liability, he is the solution." Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. The dockworkers stared in awe. The journalist, sensing the story of a lifetime, began scribbling furiously. Miss Vance's face, once a mask of arrogant certainty, was now a pale canvas of disbelief and terror. She looked as if the ground had been cut out from under her. Miller looked like he was going to be physically sick. The uniform he wore, once a source of pride, now felt like a costume of shame. The captain's radio crackled. It was Admiral Hayes, his voice cutting through the speaker, clear and absolute. "Captain, is Mr. Jenkins secure?" "Yes, Admiral, he is." "Good. He is now OIC, officer in charge of this entire operation. His authority supersedes all others, including mine. Give him whatever he wants. A pen, a pencil, a satellite phone, or a carrier strike group. His call. And Captain," the Admiral's voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet, "find the officer who threatened to arrest him and the corporate suit who insulted him. I want their names on my desk in 5 minutes. Their careers are over." The rebuke hung in the air, devastating and total. Miller visibly flinched, his face ashen. Vance swayed on her feet, looking for support that wasn't there. But it was Arthur who spoke next, his quiet voice cutting through the military precision. He placed a gentle hand on the Navy captain's arm. "That won't be necessary, Captain." He then turned his gaze to Miller, and there was no triumph in it, no malice, only a weary sort of pity. "Son," he said softly, "the uniform isn't armor that makes you right. It's a responsibility that challenges you to be right. You were looking for a threat to neutralize. You should have been looking for a solution to find." He then looked at Miss Vance. "Ma'am, you were worried about your company's assets, but a balance sheet can never calculate the value of a single human life or the cost of losing one." His wisdom, delivered so gracefully in the wake of his complete vindication, was more piercing than any official reprimand. He turned away from them, his personal victory already forgotten, his mind already back on the real problem, the ship. He walked toward the mobile command center, the Navy captain and his team falling in step behind him like an honor guard. Inside the high-tech van, surrounded by glowing screens and anxious technicians, Arthur seemed to grow in stature. He ignored the tactical displays and the satellite feeds. He walked over to a small counter where a pot of coffee was brewing. He picked up a thick white ceramic mug chipped on the rim. Holding it, the scent of fresh coffee triggered another echo, another lifetime. He was on the bridge of a warship in the middle of a tense standoff, the air thick with the threat of violence. A young sailor, no older than 19, his hands trembling, had brought him a mug of coffee, just like this one. "They're going to kill us, aren't they, sir?" the boy had whispered, his eyes wide with terror. A younger Arthur had taken the mug, his own hand perfectly steady. "Not today, son," he'd said with a small, reassuring smile. "They're just as scared as we are. They just hide it better. Our job is to talk to the man behind the mask." Back in the present, Arthur took a slow sip from the chipped mug. He turned to the communications officer. "Get me a channel to the pirate vessel. Open frequency. No encryption. I want him to know anyone can listen in." He sat down at the console, the quiet old man in the fishing hat, ready to speak to the man in the cage. The negotiation was not a battle of wills, but a masterclass in human connection. Arthur didn't use threats or ultimatums. He didn't talk about the tactical teams or the warships gathering over the horizon. He just talked. He asked the pirate leader, a man named Cale, about the wind. He talked about the currents in that part of the ocean. He learned Cale was a fisherman before his village's waters were poisoned by industrial runoff from a multinational corporation, a company, it turned out, that was a subsidiary of the very shipping line that owned the MV Starlight. Arthur didn't offer excuses or corporate platitudes. He listened. For 3 hours he let Cale unload a lifetime of grievance and despair. He wasn't negotiating for a ship anymore. He was bearing witness to a man's broken life. He didn't offer Cale freedom or money. He offered him something more valuable, dignity. He offered him a way to end this without more violence, a way to make his point on a world stage without becoming a monster. At dawn, just as the sun broke over the horizon, Cale and his men walked onto the deck, laid down their weapons, and surrendered. All 22 crew members of the MV Starlight were unharmed. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. The shipping line, facing a public relations nightmare and under immense pressure, launched a massive cleanup of the waters around Cale's village and set up a compensation fund. At the behest of Admiral Hayes, the Coast Guard instituted a new training module for all its officers. It was called the Jenkins Protocol, focusing on unconventional threats and the critical importance of situational awareness over rigid procedure. Miss Vance was quietly reassigned to a desk job in another hemisphere. Officer Miller was not discharged, but he was taken off active duty and assigned to the academy, where he spent his days in a classroom studying the very lessons he had failed to see on the pier. 1 month later, Arthur Jenkins was sitting at a small outdoor cafe overlooking the water, not far from the port. He was sketching the seabirds in his notebook when a shadow fell over his table. He looked up to see Miller, now in civilian clothes. The young man's face was stripped of its former arrogance, replaced by a deep, humbling shame. "Sir," Miller began, his voice barely a whisper. Arthur looked at him for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, son," he said, his voice gentle. "Tell me what you've learned." Miller sat, and for the first time in his life he began to listen. If you were moved by Arthur Jenkins' story of quiet courage, please like this video, share it with someone who appreciates true heroes, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that must be told.